Hello everybody and welcome to our Birthing on Country seminar series. Today I'm thrilled to introduce Kath Chamberlain, Professor Kath Chamberlain from the University of Melbourne. Many of you will know Kath, I would imagine. Kath's a Palawa woman from the Trawalaway clan of Tasmania and a registered nurse and a public health researcher. She's got vast experience. She's worked in Central Australia. She's worked in Africa. I think that's right, isn't it? And yep, lots of experience, many certificates. She's had about 25 years in the health sector, lots of leadership positions with academic institutions and government and health services. And she's now running a large multidisciplinary, multi-jurisdictional project, developing, implementing and evaluating perinatal strategies to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander parents experiencing complex trauma. Kath will be she's based at the University of Melbourne in the School of Population and Global Health. And today she's going to talk about her project, which has recently been awarded an MRFF grant. Sorry, I've just lost my thing. Replanting the Birthing Trees. So Kath, welcome and thank you very much for coming along and speaking with us today.
Great. Well, thanks, Sue. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'd just like to start by acknowledging the countries that I'm calling in from today. So I'm calling in from Wurundjeri country here in Naarm in Melbourne, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. If you just bear with me for a second while I just try and get the technology going. I'll just share my screen and then hopefully this will work. Okay, here we go. Move that there. Okay, great. So, thanks, Sue. So as you said, Sue, I'm a Palawa woman from northeast coast of Tasmania, Palawa Trawalaway woman, and it's around that beautiful area in the Bay of Fires area. And I wanted to talk, it's a real pleasure today to talk about this new grant that we've just been awarded with 50 CIs and 14 project partners, and great to see a whole bunch of CIs here today. And we've called this program, a new program of research, Replanting the Birthing Trees. And I'll start off this presentation here today. This is a picture of a birthing tree here in Victoria, a giant river red gum that's about 700 years old. And birthing trees have been used for women for many millennia across all, but not all, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And they really represent a sacred place where women and babies are safe and cared for during this important time of birth. So we've drawn on this as an analogy. Yeah.
Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, yeah. It's not working.
I can't see it. Can anyone else see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
so
it's all good, Kath.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Thanks, Kath.
Thank you. No, that's great. So yes, so these birthing trees are really sacred place where women have sought safety and been cared for during this really important time of birth for thousands of years. So we've drawn on this as an analogy for this recently funded project that we'll be talking to you about today, which aims to transform compounding cycles of intergenerational trauma into positively reinforcing cycles of nurturing and recovery for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander parents. And we know that safety, nurturing and care is a really important part of that. So basically I was going to, in the time that we have, which I think we've got an hour, and I was going to try and talk for about 30 minutes and then we can have a yarn after that. Give a bit of background, a bit of an overview of the project and then have a yarn. I want to start by acknowledging there are so many people involved. I'm not going to name everybody here because that would take up the whole hour. But we have about 50 chief investigators here. So the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander investigators are underlined. And also really importantly, we're working with partner organisations, and we've got highlighted in there the NACCHO, the Healing Foundation, Congress of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Nurses and Midwives, Lowitja Institute and SNAKE, and we'll talk through this a little bit in detail later, but I want to also particularly acknowledge Professor Rhonda Marriott, who's CIB on this large grant, and also Professor Marcia Langton, who's CIC on this grant. But lots of people. So first of all, to start off, so why are we doing this project? And I know this is going to be an overlap with a lot of work that you're all doing. So always when we start talking about this area, it's important to remind ourselves that prior to colonisation in 1788, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had adapted and thrived in this country for at least 60,000 years. And we know that from evidence that's available that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and children in particular, were physically, socially and emotionally healthier than most Europeans arrived at that time, and particularly the Europeans that arrived here in Australia. So this state of wellbeing, it didn't occur by accident. And it was really, it happened because of sophisticated laws and systems and ways and customs and knowledge that we had, as well as the of keeping strong and bringing up our kids. The state of wellbeing was centred on connectedness, and we've got here the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social emotional wellbeing model, and you can see that all of those domains of wellbeing are centred around connection to really important elements, of things that we know that are really important for wellbeing. New parents were supported using principles of grandmother's law, and the safety and relational development of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children was fostered within systems of kinship and community care. And there were specific cultural practices that fostered wellbeing that started well before birth, and they continue on throughout the lives of our ancestors until after death. But we know also that successive waves of violence have been associated with colonisation, and that has involved a lot of conflict or overt violence, and then covert structural attacks directly on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, with really destructive and devastating government policies, including the stolen generations of over 100,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. Many of these children were first forcibly removed from their parents from hospitals shortly after birth, and this has got an ongoing legacy for those of us working in maternity care and perinatal care today. And I really see, I think we need to recognise that the front line of the colonial wars in Australia, much of that has been directly on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. And finally, we acknowledge that the essential the psychosocial domination continues, and that restricts people. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities have restricted access to a lot of those social determinants of health that we know are so important for a healthy, happy life. This image that I've got on here about colonisation and violence leading to toxic stress, complex trauma and intergenerational trauma, I actually just found it yesterday from a recent 2020 BMJ article, which was highlighting the effects of war on children, which starts in war and violence, starting in utero, and then the range of impacts on child and health and wellbeing that lead to toxic stress, and then if repeated and prolonged and not mitigated, can lead to complex trauma and physical, social, emotional challenges through adulthood, and then can have intergenerational effects due to the impact on relational development and capacity to nurture children. And of Professor Judy Atkinson, who we all know and love and work with, her seminal work is outlined in Trauma Trails, which describes this intergenerational trauma impact on our communities in detail. When we talk about complex trauma in this project, we use the 2018 World Health Organization definition of complex PTSD, which is closer to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander understandings of trauma than previous post-traumatic stress disorder. And complex PTSD is caused by traumatic experiences of a prolonged nature or repeated adverse events, generally where separation is not possible, and this is most commonly related to childhood maltreatment, but not exclusively. So there's 6 main symptom clusters, and they include emotional dysregulation or imbalances, negative self-belief or self-concept, So not feeling good about yourself, relational disturbances, having trouble keeping relationships, in addition to those previously recognised PTSD symptoms of re-experiencing events, avoidance, and having a constant sense of threat or thinking that the world is a dangerous place. It's really important to just understand the basic physiology of trauma, just like it is with any sort of physiology in labour and birth. And this is a bit of a simplistic explanation in the short time that we have today. But essentially, the protective fight, flight, and freeze responses are essential for our survival as humans. So these are a strength and important. But once this system is activated in response to one threat, it can be more readily activated by anything associated with that initial threat. So it could be smells of coffee or tea or cigarettes, sounds, noises, and environments. And those things are generally not linked to any rational or conscious thought. And that's particularly if some of those initial threats have occurred early in childhood before conceptual thinking is fully developed. These fright, flight, and freeze responses are about 600 times faster than conscious thought, which occurs in the sort of frontal lobe. So that is pushed offline when it's activated. And so it can have that effect that when you're getting triggered, when these flight, fright, and freeze responses are being triggered, that you can feel as though you're going crazy and, your body is responding a bit quicker than you can think. So trying to come back online and grounding ourselves is a really important part of trying to regulate those triggers. And it's the rationale behind asking someone to count to 10 and try to calm down when people are getting really distressed, and some of the grounding activities that we often use in this work. It's also important to remember that many small children cannot fight or run away. So freezing is a really common, that sort of playing dead scenario is really is common with childhood trauma. The other important thing to remember with complex trauma or childhood trauma is the importance of attachment. And that is another important survival thing that we have as human beings. We're dependent on our caregivers for a long time. So having strong attachment with our caregivers is critical. And if we are feeling threatened at the same time as needing to attach with our caregivers, that can cause confusing responses in our brains and is thought to be some of the problems behind developing the complex trauma that goes on early in childhood. So there's not too much, I won't go into too much detail on that, but I just really wanted, as an epidemiologist, I want to really emphasise that there's a huge amount of epidemiological data that shows how this is can be related to these individual effects can play out at a population level. And we're really seeing this in the compounding intergenerational effect of intergenerational trauma in our communities today. So we've got the historical violence. I should say this is a World Health Organization European review of social determinants. It's a framework and it helps to explain it, but we've got the history of successive waves of violence that lead to increased violence in communities. These can compound the effects. So we've got a range of influences that go on around us in life. So things that happen in early childhood can either be compounded and made worse by more hardship during life, or they can be ameliorated and resolved or made better by things that help. So good, having access to safer environments throughout life, good school, things like that can really help. We know that really importantly, that all of these can lead to increased health risks. And not only are there, is adverse childhood experiences associated with things like increased 25% of smoking has been attributed to adverse childhood experiences in some studies, increased rates of obesity, violence and all those sorts of things. But also we know that a lot of the preventive interventions, the public health interventions, are less effective for people who have experienced adverse events or complex trauma. Then there's all the intergenerational effects that we'll be talking about today, and why pregnancy is such an important time. And all of these factors compound over time. And that's what we're, I think, seeing in some communities. And it's not just between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and non-Indigenous communities, but also within our communities, we're seeing some communities where the effects are getting harder and life is getting harder, in some communities where a lot of these things are getting better. So I know many of you know this, but we really want to emphasise how critically important this time of pregnancy and birth is for addressing intergenerational trauma. We talk about these three main reasons. Firstly, there's this convergence of risk factors for experiencing complex trauma-related distress during pregnancy, birth, and the first couple of years after birth. There's all these pre-existing vulnerabilities that can be stirred up, so pre-existing, family histories of mental illness. There's the historical trauma. Those childhood memories can all be stored up. There's the personal experiences that can happen. We know there's increased incidents of family violence during this time. There might be previous or current birth trauma that people experience, as well as racism and lateral violence in the system. There's all sorts of environmental factors that can make it a harder time, so housing, financial insecurity, social isolation, and other caring responsibilities. And then you top all that off with sleep deprivation, health complications, the hormonal changes that happen during pregnancy that hardwire us to be more protective in our responses, and the triggering of trauma responses from some of the intimate things that can happen during pregnancy and birth. And you can see why this can be a really tricky time for people who are already experiencing trauma-related distress. But despite all this, one thing that we really know is that this is the most important time for recovery. We know that from qualitative studies, as well as longitudinal studies of parents of children who have been in detention centres, that this is a really important time when people can transform those past trauma into healing, a time of healing and recovery. And there's a whole lot of physiological and medical and hormonal reasons why that happens. And we're learning more about that every day. But essentially, there's the positively reinforcing elements that happen with nurturing and love. It's setting off all those wonderful love hormones and dopaminergic responses. Sometimes, and they're the people refer to those as the reward centre of the brain, and the positive interactions with the brain with the babies. It creates those lovely cycles where you can really it can really promote recovery and earn security during this time. And that's why we called the previous work prior to this project Healing the Past by Nurturing the Future. Thinking of it's love that's really the healing salve for complex trauma, and children bring this into the world with them in spades. It's really a unique opportunity to to support those the things that are already happening naturally, and that is consistent with what a lot of people have told us in communities, that children are a gift from the ancestors, and we really want to make sure we're caring for them. The other thing, of course, is that there's frequent. This is the first time since childhood that we actually see people a lot. Often these are generally healthy people having babies, and all of a sudden we've got all these scheduled contacts with healthcare providers, so it's a really good opportunity to provide support. I'm sorry to whip through all that early, but I really want to talk about what we're doing. So one of the things that we really need at this time, we know this is all really important, but we know that we really need a highly skilled, well-supported workforce, structural competence of the system, and extending that emphasis in perinatal care. We're always talking about safety, but we need to be not just thinking about physical safety, but really focusing on cultural emotional and spiritual safety as well. I know you all know that. They've done this, the Centre of Perinatal Excellence did this survey in, I think it was 2017 or around then, and asked, within your service, how significant was trauma and grief? And 98% of service providers said it was very significant or significant, and this was way more than any other issues. However, only 43%, almost half of the people in that study, did not feel confident that organisations could support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander parents. So it's really important, and we really need these community-led strategies to transform these intergenerational cycles of trauma into cycles of nurturing, recovery and improved wellbeing for closing the gap. These are really essential foundations for closing the gap. We're unlikely to get the other closing the gap, meet the other closing the gap targets if we can't get this one right at the start. I know this is hard. We're not pretending this is easy, but we think that we're really well placed within perinatal care services to be doing this a lot better and helping with that. So I won't go into detail about the Healing the Past by Nurturing the Future project today, but we are currently completing this 4-year study of co-designing acceptable, safe, feasible perinatal strategies that forms part of the new project that we'll be talking about. And there's a reference here and lots of information on our website that you can go to. The 4 main areas that we've been focusing on there around awareness, safe recognition, assessment and support. So awareness, trying not to re-traumatise people when they come in for pregnancy, birth and early childhood care, a broad range of support, and how to safely recognise and identify parents experiencing complex trauma. So that's the quick whiz through of the background. So just now I'll go on to talk about this new proposal that we're just really excited to receive. And to give you a bit of context from the previous work, we've got this is the first arrows of the previous work that we've had. We're currently working on a pilot project with La Trobe Hospital and VACA in Morwell in Victoria. And then what I'll be talking to you about today is this new proposal that we received last week with the Molly Centre, received a related project, which is really exciting. And as well as some other IUE as well, and we're all doing related work. So really excited to come here today and talk about this and how we can all collaborate together so that we're working towards the same aims. So this Replanting the Birthing Trees brings together existing research programs, and there's actually more than this, but I've just put some of the main research programs here. So Professor Rhonda Marriott leads the Birthing on Noongar Budget program and the Baby Coming You Ready program with her team. We've got the Healing the Past by Nurturing the Future project, and then the Bagaruk project, which is led by Professor Helen McLaughlin. And then there's a lot of family violence prevention research led by Professor Marcia Langton and her team and others, and people in our team as well. Renee Filet has finished her PhD there. And so this brings together these streams of research under the governance of the National Health Leadership Forum and the Coalition of the Peaks. And this governance is aligned with the new national agreement on closing the gap to address critical and documented gaps in perinatal care that we've talked about. The aim is to drive health system reform and establish a transformative shift in health policies and practice. And through this, it will enable scale up of culturally grounded, safe, holistic, trauma-integrated, trans-disciplinary continuity of care in the first 2,000 days. So I'll go on to the next one. This is, I'm not sure if you can all read this, but this is a conceptual model that we'll be using and repeating a little bit through this. And Jen, who is helping with our proposal, drew this fabulous birthing tree that we've adapted for this. So the objective with this proposal is to combine First Nations ways of knowing, being and doing with rigorous previous First Nations-led participatory co-design research and practice evidence, what we're calling Garma, to implement and evaluate community-led, holistic, transdisciplinary continuity of care for the first 2,000 days. We're doing this in partnership with 7 perinatal services across 2 jurisdictions in West Australia and Victoria. And our aim is to concurrently build the infrastructure for scale-up of trauma-integrated, culturally safe continuity of care during that. We're using the metaphor replanting the birthing trees, illustrating the model, which is governed in alignment with the National Agreement reform pillars and is grounded in First Nations knowledge that you can see down there in the rich earth and country, and informed by strong, clear evidence to build the infrastructure with the clear wind, air, sun and rain at the top. We've got work streams within the model which are led by First Nations researchers. So we're hoping to expand career trajectories for the next generation and to drive this transformative change and establishing strong roots to support, and these include, establishing strong roots to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families to stay together from the start, a sturdy trunk of ensuring access to all women for continuity, culturally safe continuity of care, supportive branches with workforce development programs, and fostering ongoing fresh leaf for new growth with the resource repository and support framework and assessment tools. And I'll go through those in detail now. So first of all, in the governance section, this is really important in this research that we'll be talking about first. So we don't have, as researchers, we don't have direct community accountability like our community controlled peak bodies do. And recognising also that we're going from research now to really practical application. So to enable this community accountability, our governance structure reflects these principles of self-determination and the 4 pillars of the National Agreement on Closing the Gaps. So we've got the formal partnerships with all the partners that we talked about before, and we will have an embedded NACCHO policy officer within NACCHO 3 days a week, who will organise the National Health Leadership Forum group that will be like our board, and then we'll be like an operational group reporting to that board. We'll have a project steering committee, which will be co-chaired by myself and Professor Marriott, and supported by a senior research fellow in both Victoria and in Western Australia, and we'll meet a few times a year to provide project oversight. And then within each of these work streams, we'll have a working group led by a work stream coordinator, First Nations work stream coordinator. We'll also have site implementation teams in each, one in West Australia and one in Victoria, to coordinate the implementation. So just going on to the work stream groups, I'll talk a little bit about each of the detail of that. So going from the top down, so first of all, the leaves, we're looking at a resource repository for parents, service providers and decision makers. And we're working a little bit on that at the moment, but we really want to set this up with NACCHO for services to be able to take and use, as well as deposit resources that are helpful. It'll be a bit like one of those street libraries, I think, that we've seen a lot of during COVID. And also developing up a structured support framework. So we've integrating this with the existing iCope directory. So we know that there's lots of fantastic programs around, and rather than promote any one as being better than the other, what we've tried to do is synthesize all of the all of the themes of existing programs that are out there into 8 core goals, and then we want to work with, we're setting up a framework at the moment to help services to adapt, to look at what's available in their area or beyond that can help parents to achieve those goals. We're looking at integrating culturally validated assessment items, so the Aboriginal Complex Trauma and Strength Assessment Tool with the Baby Coming You Ready program, and also an Aboriginal parenting self-efficacy items. And then down in the workforce development resources, we've got we're looking at packages of flexible online and face-to-face training options, as well as ongoing mentoring for social emotional safety champions with Train the Trainer modules. And we're looking at accrediting these for continuing professional development and integrating it with existing training providers and platforms. And we'll explore endorsement for professional development. In with continuity of care or carer models, we're looking at a toolkit for implementing culturally safe trauma integrated continuity of care, which will be designed to complement the RISE framework and include a suite of standards of practice and tools and a core outcome set for evaluation. And finally, really importantly, we'll be doing some work around supporting Aboriginal families to stay together from the start, which includes a therapeutic wise counsel model of care, looking at how we can better support parents most at risk, including with complex social and emotional care needs, including mental illness, disability, homelessness, alcohol and drug use, incarceration or family violence. And then finally going to implementation. So this project, the previous work that we've done with the co-design for Healing the Past is using a model called intervention mapping, and that completed steps 1 to 3, with the new MRFF partially completing step 4. And this proposal continues on that with the final steps 4 to 6. So development of the infrastructure is step 4. Step 5 is implementation and step 6 is evaluation. So we're doing this with 7 services, so 2 metropolitan, 1 urban and 4 rural remote services across 2 jurisdictions. And the demonstration sites, include the Royal Women's Hospital and the Mercy Hospital for Women. They're tertiary centres, and they proactively offer the Bagaruk caseload midwifery program. And in WA, the Budjara Yoga program, which is First Nations-led caseload midwifery programs, and a grandmother program in outer urban areas, and 4 rural regional services managed by the Wheatbelt Aboriginal Health Service. These programs are already piloting the novel perinatal assessment tool Baby Coming You Ready, and they support about 100 First Nations, over 100 First Nations parents a year. So finally, I just want to go on to the importance of collaboration, and which is so important because there's so many of us working in this really busy space because it's so important. So it's one of the joys of working in this first 1,000 days and being able to work with so many people. We all care and we're all passionate about making a difference for parents and babies, because we all know, how important this time is, as well as being foundational for closing the gap more broadly. We know if we can't transform these compounding cycles of trauma, we risk ever-rising numbers of trauma continuing, and closing the gap in other outcomes is unlikely to occur and be achievable from these sort of weak foundations. I've got here some pictures of just a few examples of some of the amazing things going on, but I know there's a lot more, and something we really want to see more of. So, I really believe that if we all work together, our contributions, I have this 1 + 1 = 3, but we are hoping that, contributions together by collaboration will be more than the sum of our parts. And we definitely don't want to be undermining or diminishing all the other great things that are going on. So our aim is to be working with and supporting, other people working in this space as well, so we can collectively overcome the challenges that we've faced since colonisation. So in summary, I just want to finish off now and then hopefully we'll have time for a chat. We really think this, effective community-led strategies to transform intergenerational cycles trauma to in nurturing and recovery and improved wellbeing are really urgently needed during this first 1,000 days. Pregnancy, birth and the transition to becoming a parent is a really critical time when both risk and protective factors for trauma-related stress and recovery converge with unique life course opportunities in what is for most people their first regular healthcare contact since leaving school. And it is a time when we can really heal the past by nurturing the future. So in this program, we've used the metaphor replanting the birthing trees to represent safe, culturally grounded, innovative model, which is governed in alignment with the National Agreement reform pillars, First Nations knowledge, grounded in First Nations knowledge and informed by strong, clear evidence to build the infrastructure for the translation and scale up with these 6 work streams led by First Nations researchers. And we really believe collaboration is vital to achieving our collective aims for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, to once again be able to foster physical, social and emotional wellbeing for our children, to enable them to flourish and to lead happy, healthy lives in this abundant land that we share. I'll finish off there and say thank you all for listening, and really excited to be able to go on this next part of the journey with you. Can I end slideshow? How's that?
Thank you so much, Kath. That was excellent. Every question that I thought I was going to ask you then answered. So it's really good. Does anyone have any questions for Kath?
Hi, Kath. I'm Kate, one of the midwifery lecturers from Notre Dame in Freo. We talk a lot about birthing on country as a metaphor for how midwives care in a culturally safe way. Is this framework kind of like replanting birthing trees? Is it sitting along, like how do we use that in a practical sense when talking to the students, for example? Are we setting it alongside birthing on country philosophy as a metaphor, or is it kind of broader than that?
Good question. I have to ask the birthing on country people, probably, which are on the CRA.
Yeah.
But it is, I don't know, I don't think it's competing in any way. We're probably not, we're focusing, I would say, more on not so much where the birth is taking place. Like we're hoping this is going to be used, able to be used in all health services.
Yeah.
But thinking about it. So I don't know if it's necessarily different, or I don't know.
I love it. I mean, replanting the birthing trees just say so much about, like you were saying, the impacts of colonisation, the fact that a few years ago we saw those birthing trees being mowed down and a freeway being put in. Like, it's lovely to see that, that is the truth of it, isn't it? That there's this replanting, and that's what we're trying to all do to be more culturally safe. And I also really loved in the model the wise counsel, the First Nations knowledge and ways of knowing being built into those young families as well. Yeah, anyway, thank you. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I think there's some models going on. So in WA, you've got all the Aboriginal family-led decision-making models, I think, that are being trialled. So it's similar to that. What we are hoping with this is that we can, rather than referring people out to child protection services, we have a lot of expertise within our perinatal care services. So to keep people within perinatal care, and if that extra support from child protection is actually required, that is brought in with parents rather than parents being referred out. But yes, that's all work in progress. So thank you. We're looking forward to WA.
Yeah. Kath, I had a question too. You said people will be in the service for about 2 years. Is that up to 2 years? Is that, if you identify that there's needs ongoing, is there any way that people can be kept in the service or referred to another service?
Oh, So I think the 2 years we were just focusing on at least getting started, like providing that framework of care within, starting within that time. But the health services will be supporting them. I think most of the health services that we are all working with all go up to at least 5 years, up till school age. So they'll be continuing that, and we're just trying to support starting before 2 years.
And do you have a mechanism to refer them on, or you think that they'll be picked up, like the service will know that there's a need?
Well, we're not providing. So this
is service.
This infrastructure is there to support what the services are already doing.
So, yeah.
We're not going to be replacing anything that services are already doing. We're just trying to support them in what they're already doing. With some academic support and setting and helping to set up the infrastructure with the NACHO and the governance model. So definitely they'll be continuing that care right through up till, I think at least 5 that goes up to, and then kids going to school.
Right. Anybody else got any questions?
Just a comment. Thanks, Kath, very much. It's just amazing how you pulled all this together, and it's wonderful to have the grant. And I just think it does pull together so much of the great work that has been done around the country. And there's lots of people here in this meeting who've done some of that work. And I can see how it's going to kind of sustain and strengthen so much of what we have done. A specific question, though, I think a real addition is around the professional development stuff for midwives and other healthcare professionals. Have you thought much about what that might look like, or it's probably very early days yet? But
well, I think, you're an investigator on this too, Helen, so we'll be I'm working with you on
what are we going to do?
But it is only a couple of weeks old. I just thought, we only found out that we have received this a couple of weeks ago, so we're still working through all this. But it does include online, like working. There's some funding in there to work with emerging minds, with Blue Knot Foundation and with We Arlie around mentoring, as well as and linking in with Katsanam. And we'd also like to, I think, start looking at some of the undergrad stuff. So I know Roy and Professor West was talking about, we start working on some of that undergrad curriculum stuff, which would be great to, work with you on more detail about.
That would be great. And I have got a bias. I'm putting my other midwifery lecturer hat on, and I know, Kath, you have come and spoken. You've given lectures to our midwifery students, and they just love it so much. So to have that sort of more broadly available to other, emerging students would be wonderful.
I do think, understanding this is as important. We do all the physiology in labour, and I think, understanding all of what's going on culturally, spiritually, emotionally, and physiologically is really, we did always have that, of course. I know something's just gone astray in the last 200 years, but we had, this was a time where we provided really, the best expertise that we have. So I'm just going to try and get it all back, bring it all together, which we'll be able to do, I think. And I think it's really exciting that the Birthing on Country CRE was funded at the same time. So we're all kind of together. I guess thinking about what you were saying, Kate, I don't see it as separate. I mean, we have the birthing trees on Birthing on Country. We're not trying to compete with it. It's just trying to fit in. And I think we can fit this collective work in. As well as there's the birthing in our community programs that are also funded at the same time, and the MPY, and I think we're trying to work in a way that it's all integrated and complementary so that it's better. But I think actually if you're working in the health services and the health sector, I'd really love to hear from you, and I'm sure that the IUE team would as well, about things that we can collectively do that would actually support you in your work, because that's what we're all trying to do together. So
I guess for me, having free, information sessions about any of this too, that we can access to give to students, that's not, white man talking about it, but rather Aboriginal elders and First Nations midwives and women, hearing it from you rather than secondhand through someone like me, for example, though we can get in guest lecturers and so on. It would just be great to have. And I see Katzenham have launched a Birthing on Country information session, which I'll do, but the students can't afford to do it. So then it's again just secondhand information through me to them. And it's just, it's cutting someone like me out and connecting up, the training up of midwives and health professionals with the actual people who can give that lived experience and true, wise counsel, I guess, directly. That's what I would love to see, just the information just becoming more accessible, to everyone.
Well, that's certainly what we hope to do. We've done a quick one on emerging minds, which is free. So that's 5 hours of training that you can access for free, just based on some of the outputs from the Healing the Past project. But any topics that you want, basically, we can, if you tell us, we can look at that, and we'll certainly try and work with Nacho on where's best to house that kind of repository and just include all those links and start trying to pull all that stuff together. And then hopefully too, if people sort of take stuff and adapt it, they can put things back in there that others might find helpful. That's what I'm kind of hoping. A bit like the street library.
Anyone else got any questions? I just want to...
the Emerging Minds link, perhaps, could that be shared? Kath, would you be happy to?
Yeah.
I've seen it before, it was wonderful. But others might be interested.
Yeah.
Gosh, that was
I'll
quick.
look for it while people are thinking if there's any more questions.
Any questions? Somebody's just sent a message.
That might be the link.
Yeah, this link and then another one.
There's one comment I'm just reading there about somebody in corrective services. So from Sarah, I think so. So definitely we'd be happy to share it, but I agree, like prisons is one thing we've been talking about a lot, because that's one time where you can actually provide 24-hour live-in support for parents at a really important time. But I know here in Victoria, a lot of parents haven't had that opportunity, and we really want to, with that wise counsel model, look at how we can provide that support better. And parents are often away from some of the influences that might have led them to ending up in prison as well. So there's a lot of opportunities that have probably been missed. Okay. Sorry.
Another grant.
Oh, no, I think we've got enough to do now.
Do too. Well, I think if there's no more questions, that was a fantastic presentation, Kath. I think Royanne said in one of her messages, every time she hears you, she learns something more, and I certainly do. We're really grateful, and I want to thank everybody who came and listened. It's really good to see so many people here today. And come along to our next seminar in a month's time. Thanks very much, Kath.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, everyone.